violated. Yeah. Worldwide.
Welcome to the MMA Podcast 186. We are back after a couple weeks. It is October 14th, 2016, and we got a lot to catch up on, folks. UFC 204, Bisping versus Henderson 2 was in Manchester Arena about a week ago. We're going to break that card down. Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson facing off for the middleweight belt. A ton of fight announcements going on between now and then. Some fights on UFC 206, some fights on UFC 207. We got news coming down on Conor McGregor, a potential fine. This weekend's card in Manila canceled. We're going to talk about that. Ton to break down. Thanks for tuning in. Let's do it.
You're listening to the MMA Podcast.
Thank you, Lenny Hart, and thank you, the listener, for tuning in. The first thing you'll probably notice about tonight's podcast, no P-Money, no Ramses, no Allen, no Ross Finkelstein, the Jew. It's only going to be me tonight. We are here in the full studio. It has been a very crazy and hectic couple weeks. Last week, there was no show. If you follow us on Twitter, you saw that there was no show because Florida, where I am located, was getting pounded by a monster Category 4 hurricane. It wasn't affecting me too much in the Panhandle, but I got a lot of family on the coast. I got an 86-year-old grandma. I had to do the family thing, go down and make sure everything was going all right there. So we missed last week, and in just the craziness of this week and trying to catch up, myself and old Sweet Pappy Jones were unable to coordinate a time. Well, we couldn't figure out a time. Just I was so busy in catch-up mode, I wasn't able to meet up with him at the time we figured out. So it's gonna be a short podcast. It's gonna be a solo podcast. I do apologize for all those who can't stand the sound of my nasally drone. My throat's a little fucked up. I've been sick the last week. So apologies all around for that. We do hope next week that we'll be able to get back to the normal Wednesday schedule. A little bit of good news for those listening, those who were fans of the Word on the Street podcast back in the day with myself, Ramses, and Coach Jamie Huey. That discontinued about a year ago, and it's looking like, in speaking with Ramses, that the Word on the Street might be returning full-time soon, and I won't give away the guests Ramses is trying to line up for the first show, but pardon me, let me just say that it won't be one that you want to miss. So we are back under kind of weird circumstances. You know, I about 2.5 hours ago, I sat down to make this podcast, and literally, I want to say 30 seconds before I was going to start the recording, power went out. Power comes back on. None of my electronics are turning on. I'm freaking out. I think this surge fried out my desktop, my Xbox One, my TV, and my monitor. I'm freaking out thinking, oh, wow, this is awesome. I have $1,000 worth of dead electronics to replace now. Sweet. Luckily, that wasn't the case. I guess it was a brownout. So the power went off, came back on. And I had no idea that this was a typical thing. So those of you who might go through this experience, maybe you won't be as freaked out as I was, but it was a brownout. So the power came back on, but everything was at like half juice. So the reason my desktop, Xbox, television, etc. weren't turning on was because I was only getting about half of the power. After about 30 minutes of the brownout, the power went back off, this time for a couple hours. According to the City of Tallahassee Twitter, somebody drove their car. You can't make this kind of stuff up. Somebody drove their car into a transformer pole essentially nixing power for the entire Northeast Tallahassee area. So it looks like power's back up. All my electronics are working again. And thank you for bearing with me. We're 6 minutes in, and all I've done is explain why we weren't here last week, the difficulties. It's hard times here at Studio 15 for the MMA podcast, but we're glad you tuned in. I'm going to talk MMA. This is, like I said, going to be a very short podcast. I won't be going back and forth. I just, I thought about not doing a show tonight, but I didn't want there to be, freaking 3 weeks between podcasts. So I thought I would record something tonight. I might even end up calling this the MMA Podcast 185.5 if I can't even make it to 20 minutes. But let's forge ahead and let's talk about all the things that we have not spoken about the last 2 weeks. We got a ton. And I guess in typical TMP fashion, we'll start with last weekend's card, UFC 204, like I mentioned, in Manchester, England, Bisping versus Henderson 2. And first and foremost, let me just tip my hat to all the UK fans, A, who stay up every week for these MMA cards, and B, those who packed the Manchester arena, 16,000 strong. This card went until about 6 a.m. local time in Manchester, England. They a lot of times if they're doing a big event outside of the U.S., it'll have an afternoon start time or kick off a little earlier, later than normal. But they stuck to the same U.S. schedule, which means for us Americans here on the East Coast, the pay-per-view got going at a nice convenient 10 p.m. Over in the UK, it didn't kick off until, 3 in the morning? I think they're 5 hours ahead. So the main card isn't even starting until 3 in the morning. And a lot of these guys didn't get home until damn near 6 a.m. They should have offered hot breakfasts to all the fans leaving the arena, and I think I saw a couple people who were there at the event saying the sun was coming up on the drive home. So huge shout out to all the fans over there who made it happen. And yeah, let's talk about that card real quick. I mentioned it's going to be a quick show, so I'm not going to go into every fight. But Mike Perry on the UFC Fight Pass prelims, the guy's a great heel, man. The guy acts like an asshole at weigh-ins, acts like an asshole in interviews, and acts like an asshole in the cage. Just absolutely knocking the hell out of Danny Roberts with 20 seconds to go in the third round. As detestable as Mike Perry might seem, the guy can fight. Looking forward to seeing who he gets next. Yuri Alcantara with an impressive triangle choke 2 minutes into his fight with Brad Pickett on the fight that headlined the Fox Sports 1 prelims. Stefan Struve, man. Say what you want about Stefan Struve. He had a rocky period, especially with his heart, and I think it was at UFC, 167 or I think it was 175, where he was supposed to fight, I think, Travis Brown, and backed out at the last second because he had like a panic attack and he was having heart palpitations or something. It was looking like his career might have a big question mark next to it. Now, he is on a roll. He's on a winning streak. He Darce choked Daniel Omilanchek in the second round, and he holds a ever important win over the champion. He has that win against Stipe Miocic years ago. Call it a fluke if you want. Which I have on this show before. Call it a fluke, but a win against the champ is a win against the champ, and that is a very, very valuable bargaining chip to have when you're trying to get good fights. Will we see that rematch in the future? I don't know, but we might. Struve, a young guy in an old division, so at the very least, this is a name that I think we're going to continue hearing about. And dude, if he can perfect his reach, sort of like a John Jones has, which, he doesn't have the athleticism of John Jones. Just being a 7-foot person, you're not going to be able to have that quickness and explosiveness. But if he can master the takedown game, his jits is on point, and with those long limbs, if he really can learn to take advantage of the leverage, sort of like you see John Jones use when he's grappling, Stephen Struve could be a dangerous force to be reckoned with. Jimmy Manuwa knocking out OSP along with Yuri Alcantara, getting a $50,000 bonus for performance of the night. He gets a second round KO over OSP. Very pretty. In the co-main event, Gegard Mousasi was a big favorite over Belfort. I think sad's the wrong word, but TRT Vitor was one of the scariest fighters we've ever seen. And post TRT Vitor, maybe one of the least imposing. I mean, you look at them side by side, whether you look at them literally like that, and their body size and frame and all that, and just look at their performances, a huge drop-off after the USADA rules came into place and Belfort had to stop juicing. I think the big story wasn't the result of the fight. I think a lot of us figured that Gegard would win. I think he was like minus 250 in Vegas. But Gegard Mousasi, one of the quietest guys in the UFC, actually pretty outspoken afterwards, saying that he wants big fights at middleweight. It's looking like the winners of Luke Rockhold, Jacare, and Chris Weidman, Yoel Romero are going to be in the driver's seat as far as who gets the next title shot. But behind those two winners, I think you got Gegard. And if he keeps winning, watch out. Which brings us to the main event, Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson. And, Mike won 48-47, 48-47. I don't know what judge gave it a 49-46. That guy's out of his mind. But, this is your classic story of damage versus activity. And now I think, this is really, I mean, if I, talk about the scoring system and how it might need some tweaks, this is now going to be the first fight I bring up. Because Dan was the only one who landed meaningful punches in the fight. Dan dropped Mike twice. Mike was looking super beat up. His eye looked like it had a mouse under it. Just blood everywhere. Dan looked fine. Dan looked like he had just gone to the grocery store and come back. It didn't look like he had been in a fist fight. I think without the 10-9 scoring system, if you just use I hate to use the phrase, but a street scoring system, if these two guys fought on the street, there's no question who won. Dan won. Dan beat the shit out of Mike. But you got a 10-9 scoring system, and Michael Bisping did win the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. And as much as I want to give Dan a 10-8 in the first round, I can't give a guy a 10-8 for landing one flush strike. And yeah, it was close going in. Mike, the second round was different. Mike was controlling the second round until he got dropped in the second. The first round, a little close. If Dan's gas tank had been a little bit bigger, I think we may have seen Dan be able to put up a little bit more offense. But, this was Bisping just the entire 25 minutes having great cardio and just, chipping away. And it was enough for him to keep the belt. Dan, this will be his last fight. He's a surefire Hall of Famer. And a guy that we can call one of the greatest of all time. Maybe the greatest of all time to have never held a UFC belt. I mean, there are a short list of guys who I could hold up to Dan who have not won the UFC belt. Dan was a Strikeforce champion, a Pride champion, but never a champion in the UFC, which you know what, it doesn't sound like that's going to be a thing that bothers him. I think he, along with most fans, realize that you don't need a UFC belt to call a career great, and what Dan has done in the sport was truly great. I mean, it's sad we won't get to see him fight anymore, but on the other hand, the dude's fucking 46. It's about time to hang them up. So farewell, Dan Henderson, and farewell to the recap of UFC 204. I think that about covers most of it. Going into the week's news, Conor McGregor fined $150,000 from the Nevada State Athletic Commission for the bottle tossing incident at the MGM Grand in that press conference room. I believe that was in the David Copperfield room, which I just remember because I saw, this is a story for another podcast, but I saw a fight nearly go down in that ballroom back in 2013 with a couple friends, FRB in the mix. But like I said, that's a story for another podcast. But yeah, Conor McGregor fined $150,000. Now, this is way more than John Jones and Daniel Cormier got for just as egregious of a fight that they got into during a stare down. Daniel threw a shoe. It was, a public skirmish. People, I guess, were maybe in danger. $150,000 is so over the top. And honestly, I would normally call what Conor's doing childish, but I love the reaction he's taken because this fine is so preposterous. A, he's saying, hey, you want the money? Come fucking get it, which is hilarious. B, something he's saying that actually makes a lot more sense, and I heard from Dana. Conor doesn't want to fight in Las Vegas anymore. Conor has fought in Las Vegas most of his UFC fights. I mean, and the fight against Aldo, the fight against Mendez, his most recent fight, they're both recent fights against Diaz. All these fights in Vegas, Conor McGregor has made the state of Nevada tons of money. And if the state of Nevada is going to turn around and give him this bullshit fine, you think that's going to make him want to fight in Las Vegas anymore? Hell no. Las Vegas needs Conor. Conor does not need Las Vegas. That's the quote that came from Dana. And as much as I'll rain on Dana when I disagree with him, he's absolutely right. Conor McGregor does not need Vegas, and Vegas made a dumb decision deciding to give him a $150,000 fine. Get the fuck out of here with that. What else happened in news? Yoel Romero calls out Chris Weidman for being a cheater. Says, quote, last night, blood and urine tests. Today, urine. I hope Chris Weidman is getting tested like this too. Some of us still look the same. Winky face. And I love the first Twitter reply is a picture of Weidman before the USADA rules kicked in and after. The guy looks the exact same. If anything, he looks a little bit more jacked after the drug testing rules came into place. And the comment is, how the fuck does he look any different? You go and get that ass beat without the juice. Which, goddamn, I love Twitter. But, hey, it's very true. For Yoel, a guy who was tested hot in his last fucking fight, to call out Chris Weidman, who doesn't look any different and hasn't failed any tests. Look, you can come after Chris about a lot of stuff, but this isn't one of them. Moving on, Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall booked for UFC Fight Night in Sacramento, California, December 17th. Mickey Gall actually been up training with TriStar, and Sage Northcutt's been training with Rufus Sport, with the guys Pettis, Woodley, Askren. So they are both getting a big camp experience. And, most people are picking Mickey Gall in this one. I'm taking Sage Northcutt for the exact same reason I picked Bisping over Rockhold. For the exact same reason I picked Holly Holm over Ronda Rousey. Mickey Gall just seems a little too cocky. He seems very, 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 very sure of himself. And look, that is something you want to have as a fighter. But the way he talks about Northcutt, he speaks of him in a way that makes me think he's overlooking him. And look, you can overlook CM Punk all day because that guy's a bum, no offense. But you can't overlook a guy like Sage Northcutt who has all that striking experience under his belt. And all it takes is one funky kick from a weird angle to turn the lights off. That'll be December 17th in Sacramento, a card that will be headlined by Michelle Watterson, the Karate Hottie, and Paige Van Zant. Looking forward to that fight as well. One of the most attractive matchups probably in UFC history. What else we got here? UFC 206, Korean Superboy, Do Ho Choi versus Cub Swanson. That's going to be a fun fight. I would have loved to have seen Cub of maybe a few years ago versus this Korean Superboy. I just think Cub has been on a kind of negative trajectory of late, and I am giving it all day to Do Ho Choi. Actually, I'm about to check bestfightodds.com right now, see if they got a line out on this one yet. Nope, only a line for the main event on UFC 206, which was announced. Anthony Johnson and Daniel Cormier. Very, very close line here. Cormier minus 135, Johnson plus 105. Johnson just knocking out everybody. Cormier almost got knocked out the first time they fought at UFC 187. Will he be able to withstand the barrage again? What both of their prior fights have showed us, if Johnson can't get the KO in the first 2 rounds, it's Cormier's fight to lose. You know, Johnson sort of gave up, it seemed like, before getting submitted by Cormier. After DC withstood the early barrage there. UFC 206, December 10th in Canada. That should be a fun fight. Going down the list, UFC 207. I believe this is our last bit of news before we close it out. UFC 207, we're going to have a couple of fights, a couple of title fights. We're going to have Kane versus Fabricio Verdum, and we're going to have the return of Ronda Rousey. She's going to fight Amanda Nunes. So no home fight, no Tate fight, no Cyborg fight. Ronda Rousey's return will be for the strap against Amanda Nunes. I've heard a lot of people sort of crying foul about that. Sorry to correct myself. I think I called it a couple championship fights. Kane versus Verdum won't be a title fight, but you have to imagine the winner of that will probably get a title shot against Stipe Miocic, who I believe is going to be taking time off until early 2017. So for all intents and purposes, this should be a title eliminator. Back to Rousey Nunes. Look, a lot of people are saying Ronda doesn't deserve to get a title fight on her return. I do. She's the best woman in the history of the sport. All the title defenses she put up, I don't think any other woman has the claim that Rousey does to call herself the greatest woman in the history of mixed martial arts. So I'm looking forward to her getting back in there. And she's a favorite in minus 200 for good reason. I think she gets her belt back. I believe that is all the news we've got. That's all we got. Thank you for tuning in to the show. One last bit of news. Tough 17 alum Josh Salmon passes away last week. I want to dedicate this podcast to him. Also hailed from the city. We're doing this from Tallahassee, Florida. Got a chance to meet him in Vegas. I think UFC 194. I think I met him at the first McGregor-Diaz fight. 196 maybe. Yeah, I think that was 196. Anyway, was super nice. Stopped to talk. Always had a smile on his face. And there are so many fans who tell the same story. The guy was just a light, a gem, and we lost a good one. So I'm dedicating this podcast to Josh Salmon, and thoughts go out to his friends and family as they mourn the loss of the 27-year-old Salmon. Thank you for tuning in. Like I said, a strange episode, a solo episode, a short episode. We hope to be back next week doing it a little bit longer. Hopefully we'll have Pat or Alan or someone else on the line with me. It always makes for a fun podcast to be able to toss it back and forth. And like I said, look out for the return of the word on the street. I think we talked about maybe doing it Thursday nights starting early November. Look out for that. Appreciate you listening to this. As always, you can visit the MMApodcast.com, or even better, follow us on Twitter at the MMA Podcast. Till next week, people. Love shit out of you. And until then, we on.
Tune into the MMA Podcast every Tuesday night.
The wild style, always been a foul child. Will I, sucker? I be the coming like Noah.
The MMA Podcast, Jake is the host. And since Ramsey's been in a wheelchair, the Aunt Jimmy Show has been on a roll. I want to say John Jones is a host, so I think that I'll pick up the phone and dial 213-457-3380. We got hot takes on the stove. You get blood on your clothes if you're sitting in the front row. I throw on my gi and then I lace the hoops. I'll have Yao lying down cause he ain't the truth. And if Alan wasn't a cop, I'd mention you. And shout out to Ross Finkelstein the Jew. Cause according to you, you're an MMA guru. Abu Bisbing lost his hands, Count Dooku. If you're a fancy boy, you get a 2-minute slot. Mystery wants a title shot. So listen to the MMA Podcast. Throw a high kick, but I block that. Call me Diaz, screaming George, where you at? I want the strap. But you know that I'll never tap. So listen to the MMA Podcast. Throw a high kick, but I block that. Call me Diaz, screaming George, where you at? I want the strap. And you know that I won't tap. Mystery. The MMA Podcast. Most of us just live and breathe this fighting shit. Shout out to Jake. Shout out to Jake.